mashallah. Okay, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Thank you so much for that little background, Bilal. I was very impressed when Bilal got a hold of me in the sense that he's really leading this inquiry into some crucially important topics for ourselves and the people within our care in the Ummah. So thank you so much for having me. And so he gave you a little bit of bio on myself. Yes, my PhD was in human development, learning, and culture. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. I'm currently residing in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and teaching undergraduate students psychology and communications while I continue my international work in Islamic education and human development. So can you see my presentation screen?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So let's launch in because it's being recorded, inshallah. So the topic of my presentation is really a contemplative journey into human development within our tradition. And because the title of your group is Muslims in Academia, this is pitched at an academic level. So I'm really happy to see that some of you are, well, it seems most of you are in some kind of academic capacity. So I really invite you as we go through this to take a critical eye on what I'm saying, because we are a community of learners together. So if you see something in this presentation that contradicts what you've learned in your own contexts, please feel free to raise it, because one of the biggest aspects of our development is that it's ongoing across the lifespan. So that means we're learning from each other at all times. I also apologize if you hear background information. I'm sitting in a very rainy location on the very western edge of Vancouver Island on the open Pacific Ocean. And so you might hear some birds in the background, things like that. Okay, is everything clear so far?
They looks great.
Okay, inshallah, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I just want to start, because we are academics, in telling you the sources that I'm drawing from in this presentation. So I'm drawing from scholars of Islamic education. I'm also drawing from scholars within Islamic studies. I'm also drawing from scholars within Islamic psychology. So these are some of the key references that I'm drawing from here. All of the images are either my own or ones that I've taken over the course of my own empirical research uh, and have permission to use. So all I'm going to share with you guys today, I really have only three things to say, but these things are fundamentally quite deep. The first is we're going to be looking at the ontology as it is rooted in our deen. So I'm really big, if you've read any of my other works, I'm really big on starting from within an Islamic paradigm, and then from there integrating whatever else we need from literally any other source, as long as it chimes with and supports our primary sources. We're then going to look at epistemology within Islamic perspective and methodology. So I'm looking on three different levels. So ontology is the why and the what exists. Epistemology, oh, sorry, that's actually not the who, and the how. So wait, what did I say here? Okay, so ontology, we're looking at the existential holism of ourselves within the Islamic deen. Epistemology is going to be how our human dimensions apprehend knowledge, and the how is going to be a little tiny taste of one big overarching pedagogical umbrella, which is tarbiyah. So in a way, I'm giving you three data points from within an Islamic paradigm to understand how we as human beings function within Islam. So it all begins and ends with the heart, Allah's gift to us. Okay, that's going to be our final take-home message. And what that means is that we as human beings, and more importantly, the nature and quality of our own heart is primary fundamental to the ways in which we engage other people around us, whether it's our learners, our colleagues, our children, our parents, our friends. Um, this is the fundamental vehicle of how we can connect with others. And it's also the means by which we connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what we're going to present at the end of our lives. Can you hear other people talking around me?
All good.
I may have to move. Okay, okay.
Sounds
If it
good.
gets too loud, please let me know and I'll move inside. Right now I'm sitting outside. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what secular developmental psychologists would say about human development, so that we can have a starting point is why we need to depart from secular perspectives, is this is from one of my favorite professors at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. He describes the orderly and sequential changes in behavior that occur with the passage of time as an organism moves from conception to death as a function of both biological and environmental influences. So this is a pretty standard definition of human development from a secular Western perspective, which I think we can all appreciate and savor. And then we're going to radically depart and extend from this. But I will just point out both the biological and environmental influences of human development, which is something we really want to think about as educators and human beings. Okay, so thank you so much to Dr. Larry, and now we're going to move off from this, and we're going to start looking at why our conceptions of human development need to start in Tawheed, rooted in existential holism, the holism of being that is rooted within the Deen. So Maratib al-Wujud describes the levels of existence um, that are there around us, within which we exist within, and each has its own source of knowledge. So, from an Islamic perspective, we understand the three sources of knowledge as to being revelation, reason or logical first principles, and then empirical inquiry, or ada, as the repeated, the knowledge that comes from repeated experiments, you could say. And as you may know, there are other scholars who suggest that empirical inquiry is actually just a tool, and that the third source of knowledge from an Islamic perspective is insight that comes to us from beyond. So I'm just putting both of those, but it's really important that we understand that these dimensions of knowledge are far beyond actually what we are taught within Western academia, and that our human faculties are designed to apprehend knowledge differently depending on the knowledge source which we are engaging with. Okay. So this is Dr. Rajab Shanturk. I actually forgot to reference him here, but this is his. So he has this idea that it's actually drawing direct from Maratib al-Wujud in terms of Islamic tradition, that multiplex ontology recognizes the divine world, a non-material world, or the malakut, and then the material world, or the mulk. And that the human being has these different dimensions by which we apprehend this knowledge. So here he talks about the divine world is where we get our revealed and reported knowledge. The non-material world is our rational knowledge or our reasoning. And the material world is where we do our empirical experimentation to get knowledge from there. So three different levels, three different types of knowledge, and our physical and intellectual dimensions by which we apprehend that knowledge. Okay, so it looks something like this. We have revelation in the authentic reports, the Quran and the Hadith. We have reason as perceiving intelligibles by rational proofs. and we have empirical investigation or sense perception. And all of this allows us to triangulate true realities. And this is Dr. Najah Nadi, who was at the Cambridge Muslim College and now she's in Qatar. But she goes deep into ways of knowing within our Islamic tradition, which I want to say with all urgency that almost every single slide in this presentation is a whole field of study that requires us to go much further if we want to optimize the Islamic paradigm in terms of educating ourselves and educating others. Okay, so I'm just giving, these are little tastes of the vastness of our tradition. Okay, so now I want to give you some evidence that came out of my master's research a while ago when I was inquiring into human development within Islamic tradition. And this is a very interesting data excerpt that exemplifies the holism of human development within the deen. Okay, so this was one of the mosque educators. He was actually also the imam at the mosque where I did my master's research. And when I asked him about the objectives of human development, and I asked him in a separate question about the objectives of Islamic education, I found something very interesting. So when I asked him, what are the objectives of human development? He said, a well-developed child would be at 7 years old. He's already praying 5 times a day. He knows how to pray and he knows what to say. At 10 years old, the parents don't need to remind him. And then he goes on into puberty. He's firm because the parents applied the proper steps from the beginning. So here you have the parents nurtured a child to be able to know sequentially how to pray, and he's firm in puberty. When I asked him about the objectives of Islamic education, he said, based on the ayah in the Quran, when Allah says, "Oh, you who believe, protect yourselves and your families," the companions who interpreted this verse said, to teach them the deen, teach them the religion, that is how you protect them. And to follow the steps from 7 years old and to order them to pray and keep on that. And then when they have reached puberty, when they are adults really, then they are accountable for what they are doing. So these two definitions are essentially one and the same. And within these two definitions, you have the seeds of human development in the sense that they are accountable at puberty and that they are essentially adults at puberty. And before that time, they are being taught what to do. Okay. So the big idea that I took from these two excerpts that chimes with the academic literature on the topic is that the objectives of education and of human development are one and the same. We are aiming to be accountable before God. But then Dr. Yusuf Jah chimes in and says that the spiritual path is a path of healing. So now we have a third dimension. We have education, we have development, and we have healing, and all of them are of a spiritual trajectory. All of them are going to be a process of refinement to be able to present to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala something on the day of judgment. So the implications for education here are that this Islamic life path of self-refinement is simultaneously a path of learning, development, and healing. One path, 3 processes. Okay. So this is kind of the culminating point of existential holism, right? That what we do educationally is a whole process. And our Islamic life path contains these dimensions. Okay. So now we're going to look at the second point that I wanted to say, is that who is the human being that lives, learns, heals, and develops? And this slide is from Dr. Samir Mahmood, where he's going to look at um, our dimensions in kind of three large circles. So we have the body, we have the soul as being the nafs, and we have the spirit as being the ruh. And the way that we translate ruh or nafs will kind of differ depending on who's translating it. But I really love this kind of threefold view of the human being. And we're going to have a look now um, in what these faculties are more specifically. So we have the ruh, we have the qalb as being the heart, we have the akal as the intellect, we have the nafs, and we have the fitra as being our pure human nature that we start with, and we have the jism as the body or the vehicle by which we move through this life. So many people would say that the fitra actually belongs more in a different kind of diagram, but because we are all born upon the fitra, we have all of these faculties, but the fitra itself does not develop. It is we can uncover it and we can move more towards to locate ourselves within it across the lifespan, because when we are all born upon the fitra, and then we go through a process of disconnection from the fitra, and really the developmental process is realignment with the fitra. Okay. So I wanted to also just bring together these terms, these dimensions of ourself, as being interconnected facets of a whole. So these terms are essentially synonymous when they're understood from their purely metaphysical meanings, although each term indicates a different and unique aspect of the human reality. So that is Imam Ghazali. And there's other ways of saying this. So it's not that they are separate entities, it's that they are different aspects of an interconnected whole. And what Dr. Samir Mahmood would say about that is that, well, the soul is an independent metaphysical essence that is not seated in the body, physical, heart, or brain. It is nonetheless networked with them all. So these are different ways of saying that there is an essential spiritual dimension to ourselves that is primary, and it is the guiding function of all of our actions and developmental processes. Okay, this is also Dr. Samir Mahmood, who talks more in depth about the fact that the body is the physical and material vehicle that gives us access through the five senses to the spiritual world. And the soul, or the nafs, is when the spirit is embodied. So the nafs is both governed by the spirit and the body at the same time. And it receives content from the physical world through the internal and external senses and the drives. And it also connects us to the fitra, which is networked with the spirit or the ruh that Allah breathes into us when we are in our mother's womb. Okay, so that's the way that he describes those three large dimensions of ourselves. The spirit is the root of our distinct self-awareness. So in terms of what we were speaking a little bit about before, in that there are different sources of knowledge, and we have different faculties of perception or apprehension of knowledge, starting with the five senses of the body, seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, tasting. And then we have the internal senses that include the feelings, rational knowledge, and imagination that are all within the soul. And then we have the higher senses of knowing, being the heart knowing, the higher intellectual knowing, and the intuition. So this is also called insight, that some Islamic scholars say would be the third source of knowledge that we then receive as a kind of deep intuitive knowing. Okay, so thank you so much to Dr. Samir for this. The inner senses can be further understood in terms of this. So we have the body and the external senses that draw information from the world around us. Then our internal senses are discerned within the mind, which is kind of a deeper level of knowing, whereby the internal senses include the collective sense, this kind of collective sense of awareness, the imagination, different kinds of memory and cognition. And all of these are governed by the akal, which is our deeper sense of knowing as an inner sense. Okay, so those are the external senses and the internal senses. And they work together in the sense, for example, the imagination, also called khayal, is that internal space where we understand things in terms of images, and we integrate and kind of we bring things together in that imaginal space, which is khayal in our deen is not imagination as just fantasy, which is the word waham, but the imaginal space, or the khayal, is it's a space of images and visual stored imagination that we where we make sense of things, or where we sort images that our intellect or our akal then makes sense of. Okay, and these images can come from the world around us, and they often do, but they can also come from the higher realms, whereby Allah can give us a kind of image sense of things that we would then make sense of in that imaginal realm. So it's a very, again, every single slide in this presentation is like a whole lifetime of study. But I just wanted to give you some sense of those inner senses and how important they are. Okay, now I needed to, in terms of how we're pivoting here slightly to think about how we now would engage learners. So it's really important to think here about ages and leading activities, and the way that we can understand development across the lifespan is in this saying that is common within Islamic educational circles: for the first 7 years, play with your children. For the next 7 years, instruct them and discipline them. For the next 7 years, be their friend. So some people say this is attributed to Ali, Sayyidina Ali. Others say that it was a scholar, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who was Tabain, so he was like third generation. Either way, it has become very common in educational circles to think about education and human development within these 7 year periods. So we have 0 to 7, 7 to 14. At 14, puberty comes in, which radically changes everything in terms of our engagement with learners. After puberty, they are, as my imam research practitioner said, they are essentially an adult and accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have taklif at that point. And so, and many other things come in at that age. So 14 to 21 is, they're still developing, but they are now, there is an accountability there. And then in a way, 21 is for the rest of our lives, really. We still develop, but our faculties have been fully developed at that age. So Dr. Samir Mahmood suggests that there are two primary lenses by which we look at human development: the before puberty and after. So the first lens is to really look at ourselves and our learners as having a mineral soul, a vegetative soul, an animal soul, and a human soul. And these are all working together at the same time. But what they also suggest is that the human being is the microcosm of the macrocosm. So all of these aspects within creation are also within our own selves. So thinking about a very, even our own bodies, the fact that we have minerals, we have water, we have air within our own bodies, we have earthy aspects of our flesh, right? And the vegetative soul, which is the soul that grows when some is growing all the time, and when there's a wound, it can heal, right? On a physical sense and on a metaphysical sense as well. We have the animal soul, which is the drives of hunger and later, as we advance to puberty, this is where the sexual drives would come in. And then we have the human soul, which governs all of these more primitive souls, you could say. So we are the microcosm of the macrocosm. And this is another reason why when children in the youngest ages, it's very important for them to get the right nutrition and the right sleep. And these are important across the lifespan. And the principle here is that the higher encompasses the lower. So we have these things across the lifespan, right? We are composed of water, we have air and earth within us, and fire. Um, these things are with us across the lifespan. Okay, so as a child is growing, we attend to nurturing these different aspects of the soul. And essentially, the prepubescent development of the human being is really about practicing. So I'll give you a couple of examples in terms of prayer. Um, so a child before the age of 7, um, some traditions will say don't even teach them prayer until 7, and then from 7 to 10 you teach them. From 10 they're accountable for prayer, but we know that they don't have taklif until the age of 14. So that's practicing in that dimension, right? We're getting them used to the structure of how they're going to live their life after 14. The same would go for self-discipline. So they're not accountable to Allah until after 14 as such, but we want them to start that process of self-discipline. You don't want to begin discipline at the age of 14 because that's much too late. We need to teach them and practice. This is what we're going to be doing our whole life long. And in the age where social media and digital distractions and so many things, as you know, they actually require self-discipline. Like, I don't want to say more urgently than we did in previous generations, but it is really important that we teach them self-discipline at the youngest ages to prepare for when they enter puberty and beyond. And self-refinement is another aspect of that. So when a child under the age of 7 makes a mistake, they're not accountable before Allah for that mistake, but we really want to point out right from wrong from the very beginning. Okay. So this is what we're doing in that lens. So 14 plus, now they hit puberty. This diagram is from Rothman and Coyle 2018. And Samir Mahmood suggests that this is an excellent lens to use post-puberty onwards for the rest of our lives. So in the central circle, you have the elements that I already spoke about, the nafs, the qalb, the aql, and the ruh. And then you have the development, the self-refinement of these things, moving via the fitra towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're going to present on the Day of Judgment. And you have the shaitan and the dunya as via the lower nafs as pulling us down through ghafla, which is a kind of mindful heedlessness. So this is the lens that we would use for our self-development from 14 years onward across the lifespan now. And the Islamic life path and education within it and development and healing, as we said, ultimately aims to guide individual self-purification in a trajectory of development. Okay, so that's what this is. This is a path of self-refinement. Okay, so I wanted you to think about it like this. If you think about the timeline of development as being these 7-year phases, and we have 21 as being the last age that's discussed within educational circles in those uh, 7-year time spans. I really love this because at 21, up until the age of 21, a person is largely um, being scaffolded in their development by their parents, their teachers, and other people. But at the age of 21 now, they are now leaders of their own self-development. Okay. So I don't want you to think about these in terms of rigid boundaries, but I do want you to think about them as approximations of age and development. Now, interestingly, we go to university at the age of 18, not 21. So if we had actually been able to develop our tradition without the onset of colonization and Western secular dominance, we may actually have children going to university at the age of 21, not 18. But given the fact that that's the way the world is set up, even if they're in university, we can still understand that their brain is not fully developed into through their 20s. Um, Boys in particular don't stop growing until their early 20s. There are psychological problems that come up in the early 20s, right? So there's a lot of development going on in the early 20s. So I want you to think about this as being kind of scaffolded development versus self-development. And in childhood, we have all of these supports, and when challenges arise, we have close relations that help us make sense and handle those challenges. So that is a kind of healthy development. On the other hand, trauma can occur when children face challenges, it's feeling like they're alone. So, this definition of trauma as any experience of fear or pain that doesn't have the support that it needs to be digested and integrated into the flow of our developing brains. So, I'm having you think about these things because, as we spoke about, the trajectory of development includes education and healing for traumas experienced in most often in early childhood that can stay with us through the older ages as we develop. And I really want you as human beings and as educators to be aware of this because the way that we educate children can actually be healing. And so thinking about trauma in that way is helpful because this is a bit of a take on the Rothman and Coyle diagram that if we are supported in our challenges and we're not carrying trauma stored in ourselves, then our development it can be optimally upwardly directed. If we have trauma stored within ourselves, we may need to resolve that before we can optimize our upward trajectory. And so then from the age of 21 onwards, when people are now leading their own development, you have what I call the line of integration or the line of separation from the fitra, if you will, because that trauma is not allowing us to integrate. And you can have then a process of self-refinement or potentially self-degradation that follows from there. Okay, so this is just my interpretation of how I see development from 21 onwards, and keeping in mind that my own students are within this 21 upwards period. Okay, so implications for education here are that we are whole people, we're educating whole people. We need to attend to each domain, bringing ourselves and our learners closer to the fitra in the process of our development, and that we're learning, developing, healing, and refining all together. And therefore, our own holistic development is primary. And now I'm going to really dive into why that is so. Because as human beings, the way that we develop ourselves will have implications for the people around us. Um, so self-awareness here is key, and it's a large part of the Islamically adherent lifestyle that includes the necessity of gaining self-awareness into the internal experiential realities of the self. So self-awareness is critical for our own self-development, and the Prophet Muhammad is our greatest example. So this includes reforming our thoughts and towards Islamic thoughts, thinking like the Prophet, as well as our behaviors and attitudes towards the purification of the heart. So this is what we are doing as individuals in our own development that occurs across the lifespan. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is how we would then turn this into action in terms of pedagogical tarbiyah. And I'm going to use this term as an overarching multidimensional process of education that is relational. So the way that I understand it is being unconditional nurturing in relational community. So it's this idea of unconditional love of learners. That doesn't mean that the way that we are loving and merciful to our learners does not include firm boundaries, because it does. And teaching them what's right and teaching them what's wrong are fundamentally important for their growth and development. But the unconditional part is this: you love them unconditionally, knowing that they are one of Allah's creations, that you are responsible. They are an amana for you to nurture. Okay. So I want to talk to you a little bit about something that I'm calling internal tarbiyah, which is what happens with young people on a brain chemistry level and on a heart level. Okay. So a lot of our nurturing happens on these internal levels. In fact, the most profound um, nurturing that we do happens on these levels, which is why it's so important for us to be self-aware and working on our own development, because we are literally the instrument of nurturing and learning and development for young people. So, secular neuroscientists would say that when a learning experience is permeated with positive emotion, children's brains are primed to learn more. Okay, just fundamental. This has been studied in neuroscience. We learn it in social and emotional learning. It's a maxim of human development. Okay, so what does that mean for us as parents and as educators and even as learners? Like, think about your own most profound learning experiences are often permeated with positive emotions and love. And the reason for this, the neuroscientists will tell us, is that all forms of love activate the neurobiology of affiliation and are built on early attachment experiences. So this is fundamentally important when we're thinking about internal tarbiyah, because um, our own relationships with learners um, are themselves a type of intermediary attachment relationship that bridge between a child's early attachment relationships with parents and ones that will happen later in their life, primarily with significant others and when they get married. Okay. So, ourselves as educators, we are this kind of attachment bridge. And critically important here is that we can, in our very presence, if we are collected and regulated, we can actually help a child who may have an insecure attachment repair their attachment structures, because we can teach them that the world is a safe place, that adults are useful in helping them regulate themselves, right? And that they can be safe. So I don't want you to read all this, but I just want you to look at this. So if you start on the left-hand side, you have the relationship type. And then if you look at the top x-axis, you have the parental, the educator, the romantic, as in marriage relationships. Then you have friendships and strangers. All of these relationships activate our early attachment structures. The parental is the deepest and the first and foundational, and the educative is deep and reparative and can be a bridge to that next, the marriage romantic relationship between people, which can both reveal our deepest kind of insecurities and wounds, but it can also reveal our beautiful aspects, because when somebody truly sees us, they see our best selves, right? So this is that romantic relationship as a life partner is incredibly interesting in terms of being half of our deen, because it can be difficult because it reveals um like our deepest vulnerabilities as well as our deepest gifts. Okay, so the educator then can be a bridge between those two things. So this is why the developmental path is it is about healing as much as it is about learning and development. Okay, but now I really want to, sorry, bring this into um, the big point here now, which is what I've been trying to kind of get to this whole time, is that how regulated and self-aware we are as educators actually um, relates to the quality of our heart. So I said that we started this whole thing based on the heart. So now I want to give you two perspectives, both from Islamic psychologists, as to why the heart is fundamental. And when we say heart, don't forget that the heart, the kalb, is networked with the akal, the nafs, and the ruh. Okay, but we are going to look at it from the perspective of heart. So Keshavarzy and Haq say that a huge part of the process of change includes transference of what is contained in one heart to the other. The closest equivalent of this in standard psychological terms would be the psychodynamic concept of transference. However, transference of the heart happens on a spiritual level. The concept or the idea of taking someone as far as you have gone yourself becomes highly relevant here. The idea is that to permit an emotional and experiential connection with God, one must spend time with one who has attained this level of proximity to God. Okay, I really hope this lands for you guys as the fact that your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the deeper it is, the more beneficial for people around you, because you are going to be transferring what's happening with you on a heart level. Now, Dr. Yusuf Jah describes 4 dimensions of this heart, which is very, very interesting to think about. And I'm going to show you a diagram, but before I do, I just want to describe it in words so you're not distracted by this table that's to come. The 4 dimensions start with the sadr, which is our physical chest space. And here is where we can actually have physical sensations, like the feeling of expansion, joy, love, opening. Okay, we can also have the opposite. We can have feelings of tension, contraction, pain, and all of this is happening in the sadr. Then you have the qalb, which is the heart that changes. Some people suggest that the neurological dimensions of the heart are here in the qalb. Okay, and this is the qalb that Allah has between, metaphorically, Allah's fingers, and can change. Okay, Allah can flip our hearts. Then we have one level deeper, which is the fuad, the heart that feels longing, passion, grief, like the deeper emotional dimensions. And then we have, at the very center, we have the lub. And the lub is our deepest heart that is within our fitrah. This is the heart, the gift of Allah to us that is always bright, never dims, um, is uh, is constantly loving. Okay, so why do we not always feel it? It's because it gets obscured by aspects of the dunya and aspects in the sadr. Okay, let's have a look. So this is Yusuf Jah, Dr. Yusuf Jah's description. So the sadr is our breast or our chest. It receives sensations, thoughts, emotions, and whisperings. It's the heart that receives. Then we have the qalb, the heart that turns, that chooses, that believes, that sets intentions. Then we have the fuad, burning longing, the deep feeling, loving longing, witnessing, the heart that longs for Allah ultimately, but longs within creation as an echo of our divine longing. Okay, what we long for in our earthly dimensions is actually a divine and deep longing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the lub is the kernel, pure intellect, fitra, direct recognition of truth, the heart that knows. So this is because the heart is, this lub is part of the fitra, and it is networked with the ruh and the akal. Okay. So can we educate from our own lub? And when I say lub, I mean that can we clarify our lub, like not have it be obscured? So if we think about our heart with the lub at the center, we can also think about it in metaphorical terms as the lub is always shining, but just as the sun's light is always shining, it is obscured by clouds or by the earth that comes between, or the moon that comes between the sun and the earth. So the sun is always shining; it never stops shining. It's just we don't always know that it's shining. So the same is with our lub; it becomes obscured. Okay, so implications for education when our heart is lined with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we are clearing away the clouds, we can see that Allah's mercy is apparent everywhere and love becomes generalized, meaning we understand that that longing we feel in the created world is a longing for Allah. And what this looks like is that we feel love in flora, fauna, rain, thunder, the scent of flowers, joy, and pain, because all of these things are revealing Allah's love. And then we reflect this love to every one of Allah's creations, including our learners. The clear heart reflects nur in the surround. We function from our lub as light in the heart. We are mirrors to each other. Nur can be seen in the face. Iman is expressed in our actions. So we are literally functioning from a place of light and faith. Actions that educate, develop, refine, unify, and heal. Our role modeling is accurate and profound. We role model the Hanif, the servants of Allah, the inheritors of the prophets. We are unified within our own selves of these dimensions, and we can unify others via our self-regulation, that we are ourselves unified. We can collect fragmented identity, stabilize consciousness, bring hearts together, engage in holistic co-regulation with our learners, because we ourselves are regulated of all of these dimensions of ourselves. And so, oh wait, I don't want you to read that yet. Okay, so all of this is how we are aiming, what are we aiming to be as educators? But there's one thing now that I want to, the final kind of big message here is that I have been talking about development as self-refinement, a type of self-development. But Dr. Yusuf Jah really made me hit the ground when he said, this is not a direct quote, but that human development is not a self-development at all. It is actually the development of receptivity, of submission, to open oneself up to tawakkul, as complete trust and surrender to whatever Allah is going to unfold, the knowledge that Allah will unfold in one's heart, mind, and being. So, subhanAllah, at the end of the day, human development in Islam is uh, is receptivity and tawakkul, because Allah's knowledge and development is always, we are always within Allah's tarbiyah. And if we can submit to that, Allah's tarbiyah, whether it's support or happy times or gifts or blessings, or it's challenges or hardships or grief and brokenness, that this is part of Allah's tarbiyah of us. And if we can lean into that, then this is the way that we ultimately engage in development. So we can see this in the prophetic relational nuances, that this is what he did when he was fully present with other people, because he was functioning from that state of complete tawakkul and functioning from the lub, smiling, turning to face people, giving full attention, making eye contact, physical touch, using nicknames, making jokes, remembering details. We can do this with all of our learners, and this is the prophetic expression of tarbiyah. Personally tailored information. What does this child need to know for him or herself, given who they are? Ensuring that each learner knows that he or she is unique, and that he or she matters in this unconditional loving state. Okay, so my final take home message is, and I wanted this to bring this up to you, is that I wanted you to think now about, from everything that I've said, did I stop my share? Stop share. Okay. Um, how you would then understand development in your own terms, given all that I have been talking about.
While everyone thinks, Dr. we have a few questions in the chat. If
Yes,
you'd be willing to
yes,
answer,
we do.
I can read them out.
Okay,
So
beautiful.
Fiza first asks,
Yeah.
are there gender differences as per the Islamic psychology and human development tradition and understanding?
Okay, beautiful. So, this is a, okay, so who's asking? Okay,
Fiza,
Faiza.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's think about it like this. The Quran, Allah tells us literally, the male is not like the female. Okay? You guys have to know something, that I'm in a context here where literally I'm in Canada, as some of you else are in Canada, where gender is now an option, a choice. Okay, this is not so within our deen. Allah says the male is not like the female. There are gender differences. There are, but what this translates to are different social responsibilities. But at the end of the day, we all have the same dimensions, and we are all responsible before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, of course, there are physical differences. Of course, um, there are differences in how we develop and express those gendered aspects of ourselves and how we enact them over the lifespan. But we all have a fitra. We all are born on the fitra. We all have an akal, a kalb. The I guess you could say in a nutshell that because our bodies are different, and do you remember the slide that I shared on wait, let's just have a look at this. Uh because we have differences, I'm just gonna, do you remember when the slide of our animal drives? Okay. So I suppose you can think about it like that if you want to think about gender differences, is that those differences would manifest there. And that does mean that they are, in some senses, lower. Okay, I want to show you that slide again. Darren, where is it? Oh, yeah, here. Okay. I went to, it just means that they are lower than our higher selves. Oh,
Sorry, I'm
wait,
gonna
sorry.
jump in. Dr. Claire, we can't see your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, okay. So this screen shows you where the animal soul is. Um, it is governed by our human soul, which is our nafs isaniya. Okay, so is that soul gendered? I can't say. Okay, but what I understand, the way I understand, so I think at the deepest level of this question, my answer to you is I actually don't know. But what I do know is that we all have a mineral soul, we all have a vegetative soul, we all have an animal soul, we all have a human soul. Um, but if you think about it like this, the body is potentially where those greatest differences are. And how those differences then translate into our nafs and our ruh are within the ghaib as far as I'm concerned. And maybe Dr. Samir, Dr. Yusuf Jah, and the others would have more of an answer to that. But my sense is that our differences are primarily in the body, and it's our responsibility as to how we then govern those with our higher faculties. So that's what I would say to that. Any questions on that? But it does translate into social responsibilities, and it does translate into how we see ourselves. And one thing I love about what our teachers teach us in terms of the fact that our spirit, our ruh, okay, it predates our embodiment, and it will survive beyond our bodily death, and we will be resurrected. Okay, and our teachers say that there will be aspects recognizable of ourselves in that resurrection. So what does that mean? Like, you will know, like, when I see you, Bilal, inshallah, I will recognize Bilal. So will it be his physical aspects of his physical form, or aspects of his character, or his own um, personality? We don't know that. It's within the ghaib. Our teachers say we don't know that, but we do know that elements of ourselves will be recognizable. And it could also be that that our spirit, or this idea that you can see nur on the face, or what's going on with you internally shows up in the body. It really does. Literally, we're born with a body, but we then, what we do with our body shapes how we look physically, right? And the same goes for the nur and the brightness of our eyes. Like, so maybe is that what's going to be seen on after in the akhirah? We don't know. Will there be gendered aspects? We don't know. Okay, Faiza, any follow-up questions on that?
No follow-up questions, but I was looking at this more from the perspective of neurobiological differences that emerge in early development. So when a infant is like younger, how they perceive their caregiver and then how they're able to like regulate. So research shows that male infants are less likely, or they have less ability compared to female infants in perceiving the expressions and emotions of their caregiver, and then they're less likely or less able to self-regulate compared to the female infant. But I also really appreciate a response, like looking at it from the perspective of the vegetative self, the mineral self, and then also from that ontological lens. So I
Right.
do appreciate your answer. Thank you.
That's a very, 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 very interesting point that you said. And the male is not like the female, so that can translate to any stage or phase of life in any kind of aspect. But what I will say about that is that in terms of the science of attachment that I understand it to be, um, on a deep felt sense, when a child is distraught and the parent picks up the child and lays the child against his or her chest, there is a regulation that happens on both sides and there is a chemical interaction that happens with both. So even the parent that is now got on his or her chest a child that is calming down because of the parent's own nervous system, that there is a rush of I don't know, I guess it would be serotonin. You may know better. Bilal may know better. But there is a rush of calm chemistry that happens with both. So whether or not that male baby infant, whether or not is he is recognizing looks on the faces, there is a chemical reaction happening when that co-regulation happens. And it doesn't change what we do as caregivers, right? Like whether the child can actually, so these may be things that Allah has given us in our fitra. These may be things that have developed over time, but I don't really think it changes what we do as caregivers. With full heart, we co-regulate.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and maybe we can offer more support to the mothers or the caregivers to help them regulate their nervous system so they can respond better.
100%, and that's why I was emphasizing at the beginning, and I forgot to emphasize it at the end, is that our own development, our own heart, our own self-regulation is actually the fundamental vehicle for our engagement with other people in any sphere of life. Like, right? Like you can walk, you can walk up to somebody in the grocery store and you're checking out your groceries. And if you look at them and face them and smile at them, you don't know the effect that you're having on them in that moment, right? So we are like literally and this is what we want to be doing because we can be healing in our presence alone. And inshallah, there's ajr in that. Okay. Um, how does the 7-year interval compare with secular work? Okay, so you guys could tell me. Um, I tend to be a sociocultural theorist, and what the learning scientists have found is very, very similar. In fact, the word leading activities comes from them. And the major difference, though, this is so fascinating. They do talk about imaginative play in the early years, and then they talk about direct instruction. And then what they say in the last 7 years, instead of be their friend, they say, so instead of the adult being their friend, they say peer interactions are the most important in the 14 to 21 years. Okay, and that is a developmental divergent from the Islamic perspective in the sense that um, that's why adolescence is conceived of a little bit differently in a secular Western perspective, where kids are basically like, spend as much time as you want with your teenage friends. What are you doing? You're jumping off of cliffs, you're smoking marijuana, you're whatever. This is peer. This is what they say. This is an important part of ego, like, or identity separation, right? And so what we would say is this is the crucial period for being with a role model, for being an apprentice, for being with a more experienced and well-developed other, for being with somebody who has higher taqwa. Okay, so that's, as far as I understand, some differences. But I would love to hear what you say, what you hear, because look, the reality is this: if you guys are studying neuroscience and developmental psychology, you're doing undergrads, masters, PhDs in this, please send me all this or anything interesting you find, send it to me. Because I'm out in the real world now. Like I'm not in the university. And of course I try to keep up with the literature, but I've got several fields I'm trying to keep up with. So please, guys, don't leave me out here in the cold on my own. Send me send me everything you've got. Okay. Any other questions on that, Bilal?
All good. Thank you, Dr.
Okay, inshallah. It can be linked to constructivism in and a theory of stages of development. Yes, guys, yes, but let's not forget that these are fluid boundaries. Let's not be stage theorists like Piaget was, and he was critiqued for that. Um, Montessori, I have my own issues with Montessori. Let's root ourselves in an Islamic paradigm and in a deep understanding of child development from within Islamic tradition. And then let's bring in some pedagogies from Maria Montessori, right? let's bring in some other stuff, but let's start with that Islamic ontology first. Sure, Eric Erickson. Look, guys, Haq is Haq, okay? So if Eric Erickson does some empirical investigation, or Vygotsky or Piaget or Montessori or who's the other one, Reggio Emilio or any of these people, right? Like if they do some empirical investigation, they're drawing from that level of knowledge. We can learn from their empirical investigations, but we're not forgetting the other sources of knowledge. Okay, Rasha said she had out. Okay, salam alaikum. Uh, okay, Bilal, questions. What about self-divine as relationship type? I'm not sure what that means, self-divine, but it sounds a bit bordering on shirk to me.
I believe it's a relationship between a human being and God.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant, of course. Oh, amazing. That is the substrate relationship. Yeah, but that's a really good point, actually. That wasn't on that table. But that predates because subhanAllah, 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 who Allah gives us as parents is part of that self-divine, self/divine relationship. Because Allah is giving us a context within which that Allah will engage us in tarbiyah for the rest of our lives, right? Allah gave us that primary relationship in the first place. Oh yes, okay, beautiful. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Often Allah may be used as an intermediary, caregiver, teacher, romantic partner, friend, stranger, art and nature for attachment, nurturing, healing. Beautiful, yes. Okay. I love that. Um, Faiza, have you done some what's I don't remember what was your background? Have you done some like I'm a part-time student at U of T. Have you done any therapy, counseling, coaching, healing stuff? Faiza? Fiza? I don't know how to pronounce your name.
I believe she on the side she does do this work. Maybe she
Oh,
lives around
okay.
issues.
Okay, so Abu Huraira Shakir said, how do the various Tasawwuf traditions frame development of the South? Um, I don't know the answer to that question because to answer that question, I would have to claim to know various Tasawwuf traditions. But I do know that, so I don't know how various ones do it, but I do know that it is Tasawwuf scholars who potentially go deepest in this inquiry. Um, if that makes sense. Does anybody have any other input on that? Okay, so Maria is asking um, about how does this knowledge translate into applied practice? What pedagogical method is more aligned? Well, that really depends on not only the 7 stages, and like I mentioned, leading activities. So, play within the first 7 years, more direct instruction and discipline in the second 7 years, and then mentorship, friendship, scaffolding in the last 7 years. Those are the broad pedagogical applied approaches that we can take, and from there, there's a lot of very more specific pedagogies that we can engage with. But I really wanted to point out that our relationship with learners is the primary pedagogy in all the stages. Okay, just definitely the behaviorist is far from holistic, 100%, 100,000%. But on the other hand, there is an important aspect of behaviorism that some people try to reduce everything to, both the secular and kind of superficial Muslim educators, I will say. which is rewards and punishments. So some people say it's in our deen, we are going to be rewarded with heaven or punished in hell. Therefore, everything we do with kids should be rewards and punishments. And I am not of that perspective, obviously. On the other hand, the consequences are within our deen and within our empirical reality. So for example, if you are 6 years old or 10 years old and you're throwing pieces of rotten fruit at cars as they drive by, this is my son when he was about that age, okay? And a car stops and the man gets out and he comes over to shout at you because you're throwing pieces of rotten fruit at his car, that is the natural consequence of doing something that's really not nice adab. Okay. So I'm of the perspective that rewards and punishments have their place. Behaviorism has a marginal place within our pedagogical approach, but it needs to be like premised on a foundation of unconditional love, right? So if that child who's throwing rotten fruit at the car, I'm going to point out to that child, that's a natural consequence of what just happened. And what is going to be the punishment? I think you need to actually go to that man and apologize to him, right? And I would literally do that, because if you can't, apologizing to a human being is the first step in saying astaghfirullah, right? It's the same as if you can't be grateful to people, how can you be grateful to Allah? So if you can't say sorry to a human, how can you say sorry to Allah? Okay, anyway, like, so the point is, I think behaviorism has some useful tools, but they need to be, again, couched within a larger Islamic paradigm. Maria, please, like, follow-up question.
We can take one last
Um,
question from Sayyid Ahmed, who said he would like to turn on the mic. Sayyid Ahmed.
okay, I just, wait, Maria had, oh yes, okay. Anything on that topic of behaviorism?
Sorry, I would argue really about what you've mentioned about saying sorry. That's more intrinsic than extrinsic behavioral approach. Behaviorism is very external. It's about controlling a human soul externally, which I think is very un-Islamic, because we know from the Quran that Quran only, I mean, the big chunk of Quran talks about the development of character, and development of character happens intrinsically. So I think the pedagogical approach has to work on that domain of human soul. It has to have some sort of method that it develops a child's behavior and character from intrinsic point of view rather than externally controlled, because external control, as already shown from secondary education, specifically in the UK, it doesn't work because adolescents rebel as a result. They don't have an intrinsic motivation to be good. And that's why I have a problem with behaviorist approach being implemented highly in the UK in Islamic schools. And so it's clearly not really working in terms of the holistic development of children. So that's sort of my comment on this. I'm a Montessorian myself. I know you have some critique, but as a Montessorian, obviously, the pedagogical approach is very much on the intrinsic level of development of the child. Self-regulation.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, okay, thank you so much for that. So you're absolutely right. But what I want to ask you to trouble is the external internal distinctions, because there are, that line is porous. And so, for example, Vygotsky alone would talk about the fact that the external becomes internal. And I want you to think about that from the perspective of, in fact, this is the nugget of my critique with Montessori as well, is this idea that we are multifaceted scaffolders. So um, um, everything that happens before puberty is a kind of guided, loving practice. And some of it is external. So, for example, doing the 5 daily prayers. Is that external or internal? And when and how and at what age and in what mood or mizaj would prayer be internal versus prayer be external? So the thing with children is, and I'm really big on this, is that we really need to practice with them the external, and the way that we internalize it is through the love we share with them and through our explanations of the deeper reasons behind them. So it's not to say that all external is like, there is almost nothing that is purely external or internal, that it is always this kind of integration between the two. And our role as educators is to bring in what is the purpose of the external, right? And I think that one thing, okay, it's actually, this idea that children should be left completely alone to do children's work or to play without any kind of mediation from an adult, I would say is missing an opportunity to help children make meaning. That doesn't mean that the adult is always right there with them, playing with them, but that an adult is kind of in the background or helps highlight meanings when they come, which is very profound in terms of internalization. Yeah, so I just think we need to trouble that internal external a little bit. Maria, also something you said about the research has already shown that boys develop self-regulation and executive functions later at stage than girls. Totally, but what we're talking about at a newborn level is not executive function. We're talking about the development of the nervous system, which is so much more primitive. So that's why I think it goes back to this idea that a newborn child, we're going to love that newborn who's upset in the same way, regardless of whether that is a boy or a girl, even as we might, if you're aware of the fact that, just as an example, so the point you gave was that a boy may not be able to read expressions on the mother's face as easily as a girl might. We're talking about the age of breastfeeding, when the child's sight is only from the breast to the eye level of the mom, right? So we're talking about a very primitive brain structure, if you will, right? So if that's the case, that boys aren't recognizing, then that's even more of a responsibility for us to mediate and to explain. Look, mommy's smiling, mommy's happy, right? Like you can literally do that if you had to with boy babies, right? So I think it would just make you a better mom in that way.
Sorry, my comment
Um,
was regarding the gender education, because in my professional development, I recognize that boys need to be educated slightly different from girls, because they need a lot of physical movement, for instance, in the first, I would say, 10 years probably, and that's very important for their even learning, whereas girls can do something else. But that's kind of, it's proven by the science that they do develop differently. That's comment regarding the gender education differences.
yeah, yeah. But also don't forget that some girls are very active as well and need more, and like everybody's on a spectrum, everybody has different like different levels of testosterone. But yeah, no, definitely, yes. Okay, I'd be curious if prayerful repetition or deep engagement of the names of Allah, Al-Rahim, Al-Ra'uf, Al-Latif, Al-Raqib, Al-Wadud, Al-Karib, could result in release. That's beautiful. I love that. And look, that's so much a deep area of study that we could look really into, all of the different aspects of the acts of worship. Syed, I would love to have you ask a question on your mic. Oh, okay, wait. Uh, Bilal, do I have background in therapy? The short answer is no. The longer answer is yes. I've done a life coaching I've done a life coaching course, and I've also done short courses on things like trauma informed practice and I'm doing one now by Dr. Yusuf Jah on heart-based stress reduction. Uh, so okay, so no, my current passion is within the bounds of education, the ethical bounds. How can we do more to support healing as an educator? I'll tell you, because I have my students coming to me and telling me they're suffering anxiety and depression and other mental health issues. I am not a therapist or a counselor, and I'm bound ethically by the boundaries of education. So what can I do within education? And this is what I'm really thinking about, is like, if I present to them as self-regulated, there can be micro repairs just even in that educator-learner relationship. Okay, so I think we're ready for Syed's question, are we?
Saida, please go ahead.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. So my question is kind of related to what you mentioned in the first stage of your discussions here. You talked about how how different levels they are iterating, with the soul being at the top, and followed by you had this rationalist belief that coming in the second stage, with the empirical findings of knowledge coming in third stage, and you had like the heart kind of being the center stage of how you're understanding the soul framework. So my question is, the epistemology that you've used in constructing this framework in the light of Islam, you said that you try to separate it from the secular Western framework. However, I could see a lot of similarities between how you presented the importance of the soul and the heart in this framework compared to what Immanuel Kant did in his Critique of Pure Reason, by giving the importance to the mind as the linking between sensations and perceptions, and towards formulating, allowing us to select particular experiences. So that's my question, that do you believe that this framework, this completely digresses from the secular Western framework, or have you borrowed epistemologies and ideas from Western philosophers like Immanuel Kant in constructing this paradigm?
Okay, beautiful question. If I understand it correctly, it's related to okay, the short answer is well, there's two aspects of a short answer. The first is that secular Western empirical research, we know that the empirical source of knowledge is universal to human. All of them are, okay? Rational thinking and empirical investigation are common to the way that human beings, what they recognize as sources of knowledge, okay? So there doesn't need to be any borrowing as such from Western thinkers, because in our earliest sources, before there was real, well, I suppose if we're thinking about Al-Ghazali and some of the early Islamic scholars, they had definitely come across Greek scholarship. So there was, but that's Ghazali's whole incoherence of the philosophers, is his critique on how much you can actually draw from the Greek thinkers or not. So we really need to go back that far, not Immanuel Kant or Vygotsky or Piaget or Montessori, because those guys, what they're doing is they are using reason and empirical research to stumble across haq. Okay, they're not drawing from revelation. Imam al-Ghazali, on the other hand, was because he deeply understood the Greek tradition, he was able to parse it and critique it and draw out anything that would chime with the Islamic tradition, but he was really starting within an Islamic paradigm. So when you look at a slide like this one, let me share. when you look at a slide like this one or this one, let's look at this one. So this is Dr. Rajab Shanturk, and he's highly influenced by Al-Ghazali, but he has also read Immanuel Kant and many other theorists. And so what he's pointing out here is that the divine world, which gives us revealed and reported knowledge as revelation, is what sets us apart from the more secular theorists. Okay, so is this borrowed from Kant, Immanuel Kant? No. This is, if anything, it's potentially built upon the integration of Greek and early Islamic knowledge, but definitely not more modern thinkers than that. Does that answer your question, or did I not fully get it?
It kind of does, but I was just confused. I was just saying that there were similarities that between your framework and the Kantian framework, were that you give the same importance to the heart and the soul that Kant does to the mind. Because like you see, Kant refused British empiricists before him, right? Like how David Hume and Berkeley and Locke, they really broke apart the importance of the mind and matter. And Kant, he had to reconcile this to say how the mind is active, how it is actively involved in selecting particular sensations that formulate to a perception. But I guess in his third dialectic, that after the transcendental analytic, but even to the transcendental dialectic in his idealist framework, he did mention that how the use of reason could make us go towards paradigms that would go beyond logical reasoning, right? And he had to conclude that reason cannot, in a sense alone, justify revelation, right? So that was where Kant concluded. That was just the similarity that I was saying, that you do give priority reason to revelation over reason, just like Kant does. But in this way, Kant is giving importance to the mind, and you're giving it to the heart. That was the similarity.
Okay, yeah, but there's a couple of guys again. We don't fully separate between the mind, the heart, the nafs, and the ruh. So it's networked. Actually, our highest faculty is our ruh, and when we talk about the heart, we're talking about the heart as an organ of perception, and we're also talking about the heart as being really interconnected with mind, with akal, right? So our perspective is a little bit different from this idea that you can prioritize mind over heart or anything like that. It's really, I don't want to give the idea that the heart is more important, that the kalb is more important than the akal. No, because as we said, the ruh is networking all of them. And they are all of a divine substance. They're all kind of functioning within the ghaib, right? And it's all, so I think that you could say it like this, like that whole networked whole, right? The ruh, the nafs, the kalb, and the akal. This is the entity that is our deepest selves that predates our birth, and we will go on after our death. And what we do with that, we will be presenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, right? So I don't want to say that the heart, I'm just, as educators, understanding that our lub, our shining lub, could actually be the most important of our pedagogical tools is kind of what I'm saying, because no matter what you're doing with your akal, if your lub is obscured, you may not have as much impact with young people around you. And the opposite is also true. If your lub is fully shining and you are reflecting Allah's light all around you, I mean, what is Allah's light except for pure wisdom and intelligence, like exquisite intelligence, right? And please don't, guys, get concerned or confused when you see people like Immanuel Kant or any of the thinkers that use empirical investigation or first principle rationalization to come up with things that are within our deen. It doesn't mean that we're drawing from them. It means that in their own investigations, they're drawing from sources of knowledge we also recognize. and they came to some knowledge that is in the haq. It's haq. It's Allah's reality.
Yes, that does make sense. Like the ruh, how it is interconnected with the ruh, the qalb, the nafs, and the aql, how they're all interconnected. It shows how when can to it about the mind, how it selects different experiences to formulate sensations into ideas in the transcendent analytic. That just shows here that your framework is the ruh that is interconnected in this way, and that has to be honed. That makes a lot of sense. It's very interesting how you in a very nuanced framework, because it's the first time I'm hearing such an importance given to the soul in this matter. Because like most of us, we understand that it's the mind where we are formulating how we perceive, how we translate them into ideas. But then we kind of forget the importance of the soul here. So yes, that's a very new thing that can be a very novel understanding in this framework.
Inshallah. And Brother Syed, don't forget how much we've been colonized intellectually, in the sense that much of, it is still a reality that what's considered the best higher education is a Western institution which absolutely does not recognize the ruh at all, right? And so it's so exciting to see what's happening once people get out of that environment, or like that there's so much deep scholarship that needs to be done, and done by people like you and Brother Bilal. There's just so much more to be done, and we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like Immanuel Kant had some great stuff that we can, but how does it affirm how does our deen extend upon it is the question, right? Amazing. So any other questions?
I believe that's a wrap. If anyone has any questions, please.
I love your questions, and your questions have been so fun and challenging. And please, again, like I said, if you have anything you think I need to read, please send it to me. And my presentation was really drawn off the shoulders of the giants